Everyone wants me to forgive my SIL for what they said about my dead son. The voicemail from my mother-in-law started playing before I could decline the call. Sarah, honey, we really need to talk about Thanksgiving. The whole family will be there, and it's been 2 years now. Lisa feels terrible about what happened, and we all think it's time to. I deleted it before she could finish. Just like I deleted the 12 others this week. They want me to forgive Lisa. My sister-in-law. The woman who looked me dead in the eyes at my son's funeral reception and said, maybe it's for the best since he would have been a burden anyway. My 8-year-old son, Tommy. Dead from leukemia after an 18-month fight that took everything we had. And yes, he was autistic. He lined up his toy cars in perfect rows and knew more about dinosaurs than most paleontologists. He counted ceiling tiles when he was nervous and gave the most fierce, determined hugs when he was happy. He was not a burden. The kitchen timer beeped, pulling me back to the present. I pulled the cookies from the oven, snickerdoodles, Tommy's favorite. I still made them every Tuesday, even though there was no one left to eat them. My husband Jake thought it was unhealthy. Dr. Peterson probably would too, if I bothered to tell her during our sessions. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake, Mom called me at work. Says you hung up on her again. We need to talk tonight. I set the phone face down and transferred the cookies to the cooling rack. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of our too-quiet house. The house where Tommy's room remained exactly as he'd left it, action figures frozen mid-battle on his desk. Another buzz. This time it was my own mother. I know you're hurting, but Lisa was drunk and grieving too. She lost her nephew. Family forgives family. That was rich, considering Lisa had barely visited Tommy during his treatment. Too busy with her real estate career and weekend wine tours with her book club. But suddenly she was grieving? I thought about the family gathering where it happened. October 15th, 2022. Tommy had been gone exactly 6 weeks. Lisa had cornered me by the dessert table, 3 glasses of Pinot Grigio deep, her voice just loud enough for Tommy's cousins to hear. I mean, Sarah, you have to admit the medical bills alone would have bankrupted you eventually. And with his condition, maybe God knew what he was doing. My sister Emma claimed Lisa didn't mean it. My brother-in-law Mark said she was processing her grief poorly. Jake's father insisted she was just trying to help me see the silver lining. Silver lining. In my son's death. The house phone rang now, the landline I kept because Tommy liked the old-fashioned ringtone. I let it go to the machine. Sarah, it's Janet. Jake's aunt. Listen, I know Lisa said something awful, but she's family. She made a mistake. We all have. The holidays are coming, and this grudge is tearing everyone apart. You need to think about what Tommy would want. I gripped the kitchen counter until my knuckles went white. What Tommy would want? Tommy would want to be here, arranging the cookies by size and asking why we couldn't have snickerdoodles for dinner. Another voicemail started immediately. Lisa herself this time, her voice syrupy with false remorse. Sarah, I've been trying to reach you for months. I know I said something that hurt you, but I was so emotional that night. We both were. I miss him too, you know. Can't we please just move past this? The family reunion is in 3 weeks, and I can't bear the thought of. Delete. I walked to Tommy's room and sat in his reading chair, surrounded by the ghosts of bedtime stories and the silence where his laughter used to live. The photo album sat in my lap, pages thick with memories I both craved and couldn't bear. Tommy at 6, grinning gap-toothed beside his perfectly arranged dinosaur collection. Tommy at 7, wearing his Batman cape to chemo because superheroes don't get scared. Tommy at 8, just 3 weeks before his relapse, building an elaborate Lego city with mathematical precision. I traced his face through the plastic sleeve. Such a smart, beautiful boy. Different, yes. Challenging sometimes, absolutely. But never, ever a burden. My phone rang again. Jake's ringtone, the Imperial March from Star Wars, Tommy's choice last Christmas when he decided Daddy was like Darth Vader because he wore black suits to work. Sarah, we need to talk about this. Jake's voice was strained, tired. I just got off a 2-hour call with my mother. She's in tears. Lisa's threatening not to come to the reunion at all if you're going to be there, giving her the cold shoulder. Good, I said, closing the album. Problem solved. It's not solved. It's gotten worse. Now my cousins are taking sides. Uncle Pete says if Lisa doesn't come, his kids won't either because they're tired of the drama. Aunt Janet thinks we should have separate celebrations. My mom is talking about canceling Christmas entirely. I stood up, pacing Tommy's small room. So let me get this straight. Lisa says something unforgivable about our dead son, and I'm the problem because I won't pretend it never happened? She was drunk, Sarah. And grieving. Stop saying that. The words exploded out of me. She was at Napa Valley Spa Resort when Tommy had his worst chemo reaction in August. She missed his birthday party because of a client dinner. She sent flowers to the funeral, flowers, Jake, with a card that said thinking of you during this difficult time like he was a distant acquaintance who died in a car accident. Silence on the other end. Then, she's trying to make it right. By telling everyone I'm being unreasonable? By playing the victim? I pulled Tommy's weighted blanket to my chest, inhaling the faint scent of his strawberry shampoo that somehow still lingered. Did you know she told your cousin Beth last week that I'm having a complete breakdown and that's why I won't forgive her? That I need professional help? Sarah. I ran into Beth at the grocery store yesterday. She looked at me like I was a ticking time bomb, Jake. Asked if I was getting the support I need and whether we'd considered grief counseling for the whole family. Lisa's been spinning this story that I'm mentally unstable, that my reaction is disproportionate to what she said. Another long pause. Are you okay? Because Mom mentioned you're still baking cookies every week, and Tommy's room. Don't. My voice was ice. Don't you dare make this about my grief being wrong or unhealthy. There is nothing wrong with how I'm mourning our son. I'm not saying there is. But maybe if we could all just sit down together and what? Hold hands and sing Kumbaya while Lisa gives me some hollow apology she doesn't mean? I sat on Tommy's bed, surrounded by his stuffed animals. She hasn't changed, Jake. She's exactly the same person who said those things. The only difference is now she's facing consequences for it. The family reunion is in 3 weeks. Everyone's going to be there. We can't avoid this forever. Watch me. But as I hung up the phone, an idea began forming in my mind. A dark, necessary idea. Maybe it was time to stop avoiding it altogether. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Emma. Sarah? Her voice was cautious, like she was talking to someone balanced on a ledge. Is everything okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I curled up in Jake's recliner, the house dark except for the glow from Tommy's nightlight in the hallway, still plugged in after all this time. What exactly has Lisa been saying about me? Emma sighed. Sarah, I don't think this is helpful. Emma. Please. A long pause. Then, she's worried about you. We all are. She says every time someone mentions Tommy, you shut down completely. That you won't even be in the same room as her, won't answer her calls or texts. She thinks you're stuck. Stuck. Her word, not mine. But Sarah, it's been 2 years, and you haven't been to a single family gathering. Mom's birthday, Dad's retirement party, Jake's cousin's wedding. Because she's at all of them, acting like nothing happened. She made a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake, but... What else? I pressed. What else has she said? Emma's voice dropped. She mentioned the cookies. And Tommy's room. She's concerned that you're not processing things in a healthy way. My grip tightened on the phone. She's been in my house exactly twice since Tommy died. Both times for less than 10 minutes. How does she know about his room? Jake might have mentioned. Jake. Of course. My own husband, feeding information to the family gossip mill. What else has my loving husband shared with everyone? Sarah, don't be mad at him. He's scared. We all are. Lisa says you've lost weight, that you look exhausted all the time, that you're not taking care of yourself. I walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection. She wasn't wrong. I had lost weight, about 15 pounds since the funeral. My clothes hung loose, and there were dark circles under my eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. But that wasn't the point. Emma, do you remember what she said at the reception? She was drunk. Do you remember the actual words? A pause. I wasn't standing right there when it happened. But you've heard about it. From Lisa, I'm guessing. I leaned against the bathroom counter. What's her version of events? She said she was trying to comfort you. That she suggested maybe Tommy wasn't suffering anymore, and you misunderstood. She said he would have been a burden. Each word came out sharp, precise. She said maybe God knew what he was doing because the medical bills would have bankrupted us, and with his condition, that's what she called it, Emma, his condition, maybe it was for the best. Silence on the other end. That's not what she told us. Of course it's not. I walked back to the living room, past Tommy's school photos lining the hallway. 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, a timeline of gap-toothed smiles and cowlicked hair. She's been rewriting history for 2 years, painting herself as the misunderstood grieving aunt and me as the unstable mother who can't let go of an innocent comment. Sarah, I'm going to the reunion, Emma. You are? The relief in her voice was audible. Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful. Lisa will be so happy, and Mom. I'm not going to forgive her. My voice was calm, steady. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they've been defending. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. The plan started forming at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I sat in Tommy's room listening to the neighbor's dog bark at shadows. I'd been awake for hours, Emma's words echoing in my head, that's not what she told us. Lisa had been lying. Rewriting history. Making me the villain in a story where she was supposed to be the grieving aunt who'd simply chosen her words poorly. But liars always trip themselves up eventually. Wednesday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 8 months. I called Lisa directly. Sarah? Her voice was breathless, hopeful. Oh my God, I'm so glad you. I've been thinking about what you said. I kept my tone carefully neutral, almost broken. About Tommy. Sarah, I am so sorry. I've wanted to explain for so long, but everyone said to give you space, and maybe you were right. The words tasted like poison, but I forced them out. There was a long pause on the other end. What do you mean? The medical bills. They were astronomical. Jake's been working 60-hour weeks just to pay them off. I let my voice crack slightly. And Tommy, he was getting so much harder to handle before he got sick. The meltdowns were worse, the school was talking about a more restrictive placement. Oh, honey. Lisa's voice shifted, becoming warm, almost excited. I know this is hard to admit, but sometimes these things happen for reasons we can't understand in the moment. My stomach churned, but I pressed on. I'd been thinking about what his life would have been like. If he'd survived the cancer but with more complications. More disabilities. Exactly. The enthusiasm in her voice made me sick. I mean, you're still young, Sarah. You and Jake could try again, have a normal, she caught herself, but not quickly enough. A normal child? I just meant, without the challenges. You could enjoy being parents without all the extra stress. I grabbed a pen and paper, jotting down her exact words. Evidence. I should go, I said, feigning emotional exhaustion. This is hard to talk about. Of course, but Sarah? I'm so glad you called. I think this is really healthy, working through these feelings. And I hope this means we can put everything behind us at the reunion. Maybe, I whispered, and hung up. 23 minutes. That's how long it took for her to call my mother-in-law and report that I was finally coming to terms with Tommy's situation and admitting some hard truths about what his future would have looked like. I knew because Jake's mom called me an hour later. Sarah, Lisa said you two had a wonderful conversation today. She said you're starting to see that maybe Tommy's passing, while tragic, might have saved him from suffering later. Did she say that? She's just so relieved that you're processing this in a healthier way. She was worried about you, we all were, but now. Her voice was bright with relief. She said you even acknowledged how difficult he was becoming before his diagnosis. I closed my eyes, feeling rage and disgust war in my chest. What else did she tell you? Just that you're ready to move forward. That you understand she never meant to hurt you, she was just thinking about your well-being. Oh, and she's so excited to see you at the reunion. She has some ideas about ways you and Jake could honor Tommy's memory that might be less intensive than what you've been doing. Less intensive. Like baking his favorite cookies with some kind of obsessive breakdown instead of the one thing that still connected me to him. What kind of ideas? Maybe a small donation to the children's hospital instead of keeping his room exactly the same. Or a scholarship fund rather than, well, she didn't want to overstep, but she mentioned you still have all his toys out. My hand tightened on the phone. Jake had been reporting back to them. Every detail of how I grieved, every choice I made to keep Tommy's memory alive, filtered through my husband to his family to Lisa, who repackaged it all as evidence of my instability. I have to go, I managed. Of course, dear. But Sarah? We're all so proud of you for taking this step. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the batch of snickerdoodles cooling on the rack. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door pulling weeds in her garden. Normal life, continuing around me like water around a stone. Lisa thought she'd won. She thought one manipulated phone call had erased 2 years of resistance, that I was finally ready to fall in line and validate her version of events. She had no idea what she'd actually done. She'd just proven that every cruel word at Tommy's funeral reception had come from a place of genuine belief, not grief or alcohol or poor word choice. She truly thought my son would have been better off dead than disabled. And now I had 3 weeks to make sure everyone else knew it too. The recording app on my phone was surprisingly easy to use. I spent Thursday morning figuring out how to make it run in the background, how to save files with timestamps, how to email them to myself for backup copies. Technology Tommy would have mastered in minutes took me 2 hours. By Friday, I had a plan. Lisa, it's Sarah again. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee before the reunion. I think it would help if we talked face to face. Her response was immediate, eager. Of course. I'm so glad you're ready for this step. How about Saturday afternoon? There's that little place on Maple Street. Actually, could we meet at your house? I'm not really ready for public places yet. Too many memories. I let my voice waver just enough. Absolutely. Come over around 2. I'll make us some tea. Perfect. Her house, her comfort zone, where she'd feel safe enough to say what she really thought. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that made everything look dead. I parked outside Lisa's pristine colonial at exactly 2:03 p.m., phone already recording in my jacket pocket. My hands were steady as I rang the doorbell. Sarah. Lisa's smile was radiant, victorious. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and white wine. Come in, come in. I have chamomile tea steeping. Her living room was magazine perfect, white furniture, abstract art, not a single item out of place. The kind of space where a child like Tommy would never have been comfortable. No wonder she'd found him inconvenient. You look better already, she said, settling across from me with her teacup. More at peace. I think accepting the truth is going to be so healing for you. It's hard, I said, taking a small sip of tea. But I keep thinking about what you said. About the burden aspect. Exactly. Lisa leaned forward, animated. And I know this sounds terrible, but think about Jake's career. He's been passed over for 2 promotions because he had to leave work constantly for Tommy's appointments. How was he supposed to advance with all those disruptions? I nodded, letting her continue while my phone captured every word. Plus, let's be honest about the marriage strain. Autism parents have, what, an 80% divorce rate? You two were already struggling before the cancer diagnosis. I saw it at family gatherings, Jake looking exhausted, you always stressed about Tommy's behavior. You noticed that? Of course I did. Remember last Christmas when Tommy had that meltdown about the wrapping paper? Jake looked mortified. And you spent the entire dinner managing Tommy instead of enjoying the family. She shook her head sympathetically. That's no way to live. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to look thoughtful instead of furious. I hadn't thought about it from Jake's perspective. Right? And imagine if Tommy had survived but with brain damage from the chemo. Or if the autism had gotten worse as he got older. Some of those kids become violent, you know. They have to be institutionalized. She stood up, warming to her topic, pacing to the window. I read an article about it, how autism parents are basically prisoners in their own homes. Can't go anywhere, can't have normal relationships, can't focus on their marriages or careers. Their whole lives revolve around managing this one person who's never going to be independent anyway. The tea tasted bitter in my mouth. What do you mean, never independent? Oh, Sarah. She turned back to me with pity in her eyes. You know Tommy was never going to live on his own, right? Never going to have a normal job or relationship. You would have been caring for him until the day you died, and then what? Jake would have had to handle it alone, or you'd have had to put him somewhere. I set down my teacup with shaking hands. He was only 8, Lisa. But the signs were all there. The rigidity, the communication issues, the way he couldn't handle any changes in routine. That doesn't get better, it gets worse. Especially after brain trauma from cancer treatment. She sat back down, reaching across to pat my knee. I know it sounds harsh, but sometimes God spares us from burdens we're not equipped to handle. The recording was perfect. Clear, detailed, damning. But she wasn't done. And think about future children. You're only 34. You could have a completely normal pregnancy, a healthy baby who actually brings you joy instead of constant worry. Imagine family gatherings where you can relax and socialize instead of chasing after a kid who's having a meltdown because someone used the wrong color plates. My phone felt warm against my ribs, capturing every poisonous word. You really think we could be happy again? I think you could have the family life you always deserved. The kind where Jake comes home from work excited to see his wife instead of dreading whatever crisis happened that day. Where you can take vacations and go to restaurants and do all the things normal families do. Normal. There was that word again. Lisa, I said carefully, have you ever said any of this to other people in the family? Her face flushed slightly. Well, I may have mentioned to your mother-in-law how concerned I was about the toll everything was taking on you and Jake. And when people ask why you've been so resistant to moving forward, I try to help them understand that losing a special needs child is complicated. Complicated how? There's grief, obviously, but there's also relief. And that's confusing for parents to process. They feel guilty about feeling relieved, so they overcompensate by idealizing the child's memory. I stood up abruptly. I should go. Of course. This has been so much progress, Sarah. I'm so proud of you for being honest about these difficult feelings. She walked me to the door, practically glowing with satisfaction. The reunion is going to be wonderful. Everyone's going to be so happy to see you healing. I made it to my car before the rage hit in full force. Sitting in her driveway, I played back the last few minutes of recording, listening to her explain how my grief was really relief, how my beautiful boy had been nothing but a burden destined for institutionalization. 18 more days until the family reunion. 18 days to prepare for the moment when everyone who'd spent 2 years defending Lisa's mistake would hear exactly what kind of person they'd been protecting. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold, letting the November air sting my face. In my pocket, my phone held 43 minutes of Lisa's true thoughts about Tommy, about me, about families like ours. It was more than enough. That night, Jake found me in Tommy's room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with photo albums spread around me like fallen leaves. Sarah? You missed dinner. His voice was gentle, careful. The same tone he'd used during Tommy's worst chemo days. I made that pasta you like. I didn't look up from the picture in my hands. Tommy at age 6, chocolate cake smeared across his grin at his birthday party. Lisa had been there that day, I remembered now. Standing in the background of several photos, checking her phone while Tommy blew out his candles. I had tea with Lisa today. Jake went very still. You what? We talked. About Tommy. About everything. I traced Tommy's face through the plastic sleeve. She had some interesting perspectives on what his life would have been like. Sarah. Jake sat down beside me, moving carefully like I might bolt. What did you two talk about? I finally looked at him, really looked. When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? When had his hair started thinning at the temples? He looked older than his 36 years, worn down by grief and the constant family pressure and a wife who baked cookies for a dead child every Tuesday. She thinks she would have been happier if Tommy had never been born. That's not, she didn't say that. Not in those exact words, no. I set down the photo and picked up another one, Tommy arranging his Hot Wheels by color, tongue poking out in concentration. But she said autism parents have an 80% divorce rate. That you were already struggling with his behaviors before he got sick. That your career suffered because of all his appointments. Jake's face went pale. Sarah, whatever she said, she's trying to help in her own misguided way. Is it true? Is what true? Were you passed over for promotions because of Tommy's medical needs? The silence stretched between us, heavy with truth. Outside, a car door slammed, and Mrs. Patterson's dog started barking again. There were a couple of opportunities, Jake said finally. But I chose to prioritize family. That was my decision. How many opportunities? It doesn't matter. How many, Jake? He ran his hands through his thinning hair. 3. Maybe 4. But Sarah, I never resented Tommy for that. Never. Those were my choices as his father. But I could see it now, looking back, the tension in his shoulders when his phone rang during important meetings, the way he'd grip the steering wheel during the drive to yet another specialist appointment, the careful mask he'd worn when other parents complained about soccer practice schedules while we were discussing feeding tubes and modified curricula. Did you tell your family about our financial situation? What do you mean? Lisa knew about the medical bills. She knew we were struggling to pay them off. I watched his face carefully. She knew you were working 60-hour weeks. Jake looked down at his hands. I may have mentioned to my mom that things were tight. Parents talk, Sarah. They worry. What else did you tell them? Nothing that wasn't. What else? My voice was sharp enough that he flinched. I told them I was worried about you. That you weren't sleeping, weren't eating properly. That keeping Tommy's room exactly the same might not be healthy. He gestured around us at the unchanged space, the unmade bed, the action figures, the dinosaur book stacked on the nightstand. I was scared, Sarah. I still am. I felt something cold settle in my chest. So when Lisa said those things at the funeral, she wasn't speaking from grief or alcohol. She was speaking from months of conversations with you about how difficult our life was. That's not, no. She took things out of context. Did she? I stood up, album sliding off my lap. Because today she seemed very well informed about Tommy's prognosis. About how autism gets worse as kids age. About how families like ours are prisoners in our own homes. Jake stood too, reaching for me. Sarah, you're twisting this. Am I? Because it sounds like everyone in your family has been discussing Tommy's burden on our marriage for years. And when he died, Lisa just said out loud what everyone was thinking. That is not what happened. But his voice lacked conviction, and I could see the truth in his eyes. The relief he'd felt, buried so deep under guilt and grief that maybe he didn't even acknowledge it himself. The secret gratitude that our lives could finally be normal. That we could finally be normal. My phone buzzed with a text message. Emma, Mom said you called Lisa. So proud of you for taking this step. Can't wait to see you at the reunion. Love you. Then another from Jake's cousin Beth. Jake's mom told me you and Lisa worked things out. So happy for your family. See you in 2 weeks. And another from Aunt Janet. Heard the good news. Lisa is over the moon. This is going to be the best reunion yet. The narrative was already spreading. Sarah had come to her senses. Sarah had accepted the truth about her difficult child. Sarah was ready to move on and be normal again. I looked at Jake, standing in our dead son's bedroom, surrounded by the toys and books and clothes of a boy he'd loved but found exhausting. A boy whose death had given him his life back. The reunion is in 17 days, I said quietly. Sarah, what are you planning? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past him, out of Tommy's room, down the hallway lined with school photos and finger paintings and Mother's Day cards made from construction paper and pure love. 17 days to decide whether destroying my marriage was worth destroying Lisa. 17 days to choose between forgiveness and justice. In my pocket, my phone held 43 minutes of Lisa's true thoughts, and in my heart, I held 2 years of rage that felt like it might burn the whole world down. The first recording was so successful that I decided to get another one. Insurance, in case anyone claimed the tea conversation was taken out of context or manipulated somehow. Sunday morning, I called Jake's mother directly. Margaret, it's Sarah. I was wondering if you had time to talk today. About Tommy, and Lisa, and everything. Her voice practically vibrated with excitement. Of course, dear. Lisa told me about your conversation yesterday. I'm so relieved you're finally working through this. Would you like to come over? Richard's at his golf game, so we'd have privacy. Perfect. I arrived at Margaret's house at 11:30 a.m., phone already recording. She greeted me with tears in her eyes and the kind of bone-crushing hug reserved for prodigal daughters-in-law who'd finally seen the light. Oh, Sarah. I've been so worried about you. We all have. She led me to her sun-drenched kitchen, where she'd already prepared coffee and store-bought Danish. Lisa said you had such a breakthrough yesterday. It was enlightening. I accepted the coffee, letting my hands shake just slightly around the mug. She helped me see things I'd been avoiding. That's what family does. We tell each other hard truths when necessary. Margaret settled across from me, her face earnest and caring. I know this has been difficult, but Lisa only ever wanted what was best for you and Jake. She mentioned that Tommy's condition might have gotten worse as he aged. Margaret nodded gravely. Oh, absolutely. My neighbor's grandson is autistic, he's 16 now, and they can barely manage him. Violent outbursts, property damage. They've had to put locks on everything. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think they're looking into residential facilities. My stomach clenched. Residential facilities. Well, what choice do they have? The boy is bigger than his mother now. Last month he broke her wrist during a meltdown over something trivial, the wrong brand of cereal, I think. Can you imagine living in fear of your own child? I forced myself to nod sympathetically while my phone captured every word. That does sound terrifying. Exactly. And that's what we were all worried about for you and Jake. Tommy was already having those episodes at 8, remember the incident at Easter when he threw that plate? I remembered Easter 2021. Tommy had been overwhelmed by the crowd and noise, and when someone moved his carefully arranged Easter eggs, he knocked over his plate. It had been made of plastic. No one was hurt. He'd apologized immediately, tears streaming down his face as he helped clean up the scattered food. That was just the beginning, Margaret continued. Lisa and I talked about it afterward, how much worse it could get as he grew older and stronger. And with the developmental delays from the cancer treatment on top of everything else. You and Lisa discussed Tommy's future? We discussed our concerns for your family, yes. The financial strain, the impact on Jake's career, the toll on your marriage. She reached across to squeeze my hand. Honey, we watched you both struggling for years. You barely attended family functions because of Tommy's needs. Jake looked exhausted all the time. And you, she studied my face with practiced maternal concern. You were disappearing. Becoming someone we didn't recognize. What do you mean? You used to be so vibrant, so social. But every conversation became about therapy schedules or doctor appointments or Tommy's latest crisis at school. You couldn't talk about anything else because your whole life revolved around managing his problems. The coffee tasted bitter, acidic. I was being his mother. Of course you were. And you did everything humanly possible for that boy. Her voice was gentle but firm. But Sarah, there has to be room in a mother's life for other things. For her marriage, her own dreams, her other relationships. Tommy's needs were so overwhelming that there wasn't space for anything else. Other things like what? Margaret's eyes lit up. Like the Sarah we used to know. Remember how you talked about going back to school for your master's degree? Or how you and Jake planned to travel to Europe for your 5th anniversary? Tommy's care needs made all of that impossible. I did remember those dreams. Graduate school and art therapy. The trip to Italy we'd planned and replaned and finally canceled when Tommy started having seizures. The career aspirations that got shelved for IEP meetings and occupational therapy sessions. But now, Margaret continued, you have the chance to rediscover who you are outside of being Tommy's caregiver. You're only 34, Sarah. You could go back to school, travel, maybe even give Jake a brother or sister for Tommy, she caught herself. I mean, you could have another child. A healthy one this time. The recording app showed 38 minutes and counting. More than enough. Margaret, I should probably go. Jake's expecting me for lunch. Of course, dear. But Sarah? She walked me to the door, her face glowing with satisfaction. I'm so proud of you for facing these difficult truths. Lisa was right, this kind of honest reflection is exactly what you needed. I sat in Margaret's driveway for 10 minutes after leaving, listening to the wind rattle through the bare November trees. In the space of 24 hours, I'd recorded nearly an hour and a half of my husband's family explaining why my son's death was a blessing in disguise. But I needed one more piece of evidence. The most important one. That evening, I found Jake in his home office, working on his laptop with papers spread across the desk. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, his expression cautious. Hey. How was your visit with Mom? Productive. I leaned against the doorframe, phone recording in my back pocket. She had some interesting insights about Tommy's future. Jake's fingers stilled on the keyboard. What kind of insights? About how his autism would have gotten worse as he aged. How he might have become violent or needed institutional care. I kept my voice neutral, curious. She seemed very knowledgeable about it. Mom tends to catastrophize things. Does she? Because she mentioned that you and I used to have other plans. Graduate school, travel, career goals. I stepped into the office. Things that became impossible because of Tommy's needs. Jake closed his laptop slowly. Sarah, where are you going with this? I'm just wondering if you ever resented him. For the opportunities we had to pass up, the life we couldn't have. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken truth. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, fading into the November night. I loved Tommy, Jake said finally. More than my own life. That's not what I asked. He stood up, walking to the window that looked out over our backyard. The swing set was still there, bright red and yellow plastic that Tommy had outgrown months before his diagnosis but begged us to keep anyway. Sometimes, Jake whispered, I wondered what our life would have been like if he'd been different. The words hung in the air like a confession. My phone captured them perfectly. Different how? Easier. More typical. He turned back to me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Does that make me a terrible father? 15 days until the family reunion. 15 days until I played every word of these recordings for the people who'd spent 2 years defending Lisa's grief-stricken mistake. Looking at my husband's face, the guilt and relief and love and resentment all tangled together, I realized I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. And it felt like dying all over again. That night, I sat alone in Tommy's room, listening to the recordings on loop. Jake's voice, admitting he'd wondered what life would have been like with an easier child. Margaret explaining how I disappeared into Tommy's care. Lisa describing autism families as prisoners in their own homes. 2 hours and 17 minutes of audio evidence that would destroy every relationship I had left. But as I played Jake's confession for the third time, something else caught my attention. Background noise from his office, the printer running, papers shuffling. He'd been working on something while we talked, something important enough to spread across his entire desk on a Sunday evening. I crept downstairs and slipped into his office. The papers were still there, organized in neat stacks with post-it note labels. Insurance claims final. Medical bills outstanding. Tommy's fund disbursements. Tommy's fund. I'd forgotten about the GoFundMe Jake's coworkers had set up during Tommy's final hospitalization. It had raised almost $40,000 from friends, family, and strangers who'd read Tommy's story online. I picked up the disbursement file with trembling hands. The first few pages showed legitimate expenses, funeral costs, outstanding medical bills, payments to St. Jude's. But then I saw something that made my blood freeze. A check dated 3 weeks ago. Made out to Berkshire Travel Solutions for $8,400. The memo line read, European package, 2 adults. The Italy trip. The one we'd canceled twice because of Tommy's care needs. The one Margaret had mentioned that afternoon as an example of dreams deferred by our son's overwhelming needs. I flipped through more pages. A deposit for graduate school applications, my graduate school applications, the art therapy program I'd mentioned wanting to pursue someday. A payment to a real estate agent for consultation services dated last month. Jake had been planning our post-Tommy life. Using money donated for our son's medical expenses to fund the future everyone thought we deserved. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone. This wasn't just about Lisa anymore. This was about my husband systematically erasing Tommy's impact on our lives while I was upstairs baking his favorite cookies and preserving his bedroom like a shrine. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jake's voice carried from the hallway, Sarah? Everything okay down there? I quickly returned the papers to their stacks and slipped out of the office, meeting him at the bottom of the stairs with what I hoped was a normal expression. Couldn't sleep. I was getting some water. He studied my face in the dim hallway light. You look upset. Are you having second thoughts about the reunion? Actually, no. I think I'm more ready than ever. Something flickered across his features, relief, maybe, or anticipation. Good. Mom called earlier, after you left. She's so excited that you and Lisa worked things out. She's planning a special dinner for Saturday night, just family. Just family, I repeated. The people who matter most. The people who love us. He reached for my hand, squeezing gently. I know this has been hard, Sarah, but I really think this is going to be a fresh start for everyone. Fresh start. Like Tommy had been the thing holding us all back from happiness. I should try to get some sleep, I said, pulling away from him. Of course. Big day tomorrow. I scheduled us appointments with that financial planner I mentioned. Time to start thinking about our future again. Our future. Built on $40,000 of stranger sympathy and Tommy's grave. As I walked back upstairs, past the gallery of school photos and finger paintings, I realized the reunion wasn't just about exposing Lisa anymore. It was about exposing all of them. 13 days left to prepare for the complete destruction of my family. And for the first time since Tommy died, I felt something other than grief consuming me. I felt rage so pure it could burn down the world. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While Jake showered, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library, the first time I'd used a personal day since returning to work 6 months after Tommy's funeral. I had research to do. The Berkshire Travel Solutions website showed exactly what I expected, romantic Italian getaway, 14 days, 2 adults. Visit the vineyards of Tuscany and the art galleries of Florence. The booking confirmation Jake had printed was dated October 28th. 3 days after my conversation with Emma, when I'd first mentioned going to the reunion. He'd booked our dream vacation the moment he thought I was ready to move forward. I photographed everything, then moved to his laptop. His password was still Tommy's birthday, a irony that made my chest tight. His browser history told the story of a man planning a completely different life. Graduate school websites, real estate listings for condos downtown, restaurant reviews for places that explicitly advertise themselves as adults only or intimate settings for couples. The search history went back 14 months. 7 months after Tommy died, Jake had started researching our fresh start. But it was the deleted emails that made my hands shake. Jake wasn't tech-savvy enough to permanently erase them, and I'd learned more about computer recovery than I'd ever wanted to know during Tommy's hospital stays, helping him save his Minecraft worlds when the hospital computers glitched. The first deleted email was from Lisa, dated 6 weeks after the funeral. Jake, Sarah's reaction at dinner was even worse than we expected. Have you considered grief counseling? Not for her, for you. You need support dealing with her unhealthy attachment to Tommy's things. Call me. His response, Lisa, I know you're trying to help, but Sarah needs time. We all grieve differently. The room, the cookies, it's her process. Give her space. J. But 3 weeks later, his tone had changed. You might be right about professional help. She spent 4 hours yesterday organizing Tommy's clothes by season. When I suggested donating some items, she actually yelled at me. This isn't healthy for either of us. Lisa's reply, of course it's not healthy. Jake, you're enabling this behavior. Every day you allow her to live in this fantasy where Tommy's still coming home is another day she doesn't deal with reality. You need to set boundaries. The email chain continued for months. Jake's growing frustration, Lisa's increasingly bold advice. By month 6, Lisa was sending articles about complicated grief and unhealthy attachment patterns. Jake was forwarding them to his mother with notes like, this sounds familiar, and maybe we should stage an intervention. An intervention. For baking cookies and keeping my son's bedroom intact. But it was Jake's email to his brother Mark that made me understand the full scope of their conversations. You asked how I'm doing financially. Honestly, it's been brutal. Tommy's final hospital stay cost us everything, even after insurance. I'm working overtime just to keep us afloat. Sometimes I wonder if Sarah realizes how close we came to losing the house. The GoFundMe money is helping, but she doesn't know I've had to use some of it for basic expenses. She thinks it's all going to medical bills, and I can't tell her otherwise without admitting how bad things got. Mark's response, Jesus, Jake. I had no idea it was that serious. What about the Italy fund you two had been building? Gone. All of it. Tommy's care wiped out our savings, the vacation fund, everything. Sarah doesn't know because I handled all the finances during his treatment. She was too focused on his care to notice. Too focused on his care. Like that was a character flaw instead of love. The most recent email was dated just 5 days ago, sent to his mother. Mom, Sarah's finally starting to accept reality about Tommy's situation. Lisa's conversation with her really helped. I think we're going to be okay. I've been planning some surprises, the trip to Italy we always talked about, maybe support for her going back to school. I want to show her that life can be good again. Better than before, even. We can have the marriage we always wanted. The marriage we always wanted. As if our previous marriage, the one that included Tommy, had been some kind of consolation prize. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. Jake would be down in 10 minutes, ready to drive to the financial planner who was apparently going to help us optimize our future using money donated for Tommy's medical expenses. I closed his laptop and sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the silence of our too-empty house. The snickerdoodles from yesterday sat untouched on the cooling rack, already going stale. For 2 years, I thought Jake was grieving alongside me. I thought his patience with my rituals and his gentle suggestions about moving forward came from love and concern. But Jake hadn't been grieving. He'd been waiting. Waiting for me to finish mourning so we could start the life Tommy's existence had prevented us from having. The life his death had finally made possible. My phone buzzed. A text from Lisa, Sarah. Margaret told me you two had such a lovely chat yesterday. I'm so excited for the reunion. I have some wonderful ideas for how we can honor Tommy's memory in a more positive way. See you Saturday. Hugs and kisses. 11 days. 11 days until I played every recording, showed every email, shared every piece of evidence that proved Tommy's death wasn't a tragedy to be mourned, it was a problem that had finally been solved. But first, I had a financial planning appointment to attend. I wanted to hear exactly how Jake planned to spend our dead son's charity money. The financial planner's office smelled like leather and false promises. Jake sat across from Mr. Henderson's mahogany desk, practically vibrating with excitement as he spread out our future planning documents. So, Jake, you mentioned on the phone that you and Sarah are ready to make some significant life changes, Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Let's talk about your current assets. Jake pulled out a folder I'd never seen before. We have approximately $37,000 remaining from a fundraiser account, plus Sarah's inheritance from her grandmother, about $15,000 she doesn't know I've been saving for her. My grandmother's inheritance. The money she'd left me specifically for something that would make me happy. I told Jake to put it away during Tommy's treatment, never thinking to ask where. And your goals for these funds? Henderson's pen hovered over his legal pad. Well, Sarah's always wanted to pursue graduate school in art therapy. The program at State runs about $12,000 for the degree. Jake's voice was warm, loving. The perfect devoted husband supporting his wife's dreams. And we've been planning a trip to Italy for years, something we had to postpone due to family circumstances. Family circumstances. That's what Tommy's cancer had been reduced to. Excellent. Educational investment and experiences that will strengthen your marriage. Henderson made notes. What about housing? Are you planning to stay in your current home? Jake shifted in his chair, glancing at me. Actually, we've been discussing downsizing. Our current house has 4 bedrooms, but we really only need 2. The extra space has become emotionally difficult. Ah yes, you mentioned you'd experienced a loss. I'm sorry for your troubles. Henderson's sympathy was professional, practiced. A fresh start in a new environment can be very therapeutic for couples dealing with grief. That's exactly what we're hoping for, Jake said. Sarah's been having trouble letting go of certain attachments to the house. But I think she's finally ready to move forward. I sat perfectly still, watching my husband plan our post-Tommy life with money donated by strangers who thought they were helping us honor our son's memory. Now, Jake mentioned you might be interested in the graduate program at State. Henderson addressed me directly. That's a wonderful field. Very rewarding work. Yes, I managed. I've always been drawn to helping people process trauma. Perfect. And the Italy trip, that sounds like exactly what you two need. Sometimes couples forget to prioritize their relationship during difficult periods. This kind of romantic reconnection can be transformative. Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. We're really excited about building something new together. Focusing on our marriage instead of other things. Other things. Like the memory of our dead son. Henderson pulled out a thick packet of forms. Let's structure this properly. I'd recommend putting the education funds in a dedicated account, tax advantages there. The travel budget can go into short-term savings. And for the house hunting, I can refer you to an excellent realtor who specializes in helping couples transition to child-free lifestyles. Child-free lifestyles. As if we'd made a choice instead of watching our 8-year-old die in a hospital bed. That sounds perfect, Jake said. We're ready to start fresh. Wonderful. Sarah, you'll need to sign these education fund documents, and both of you will need to authorize the account transfers. Henderson slid papers across the desk. Timeline-wise, when are you hoping to begin graduate school? I stared at the forms, my name already typed in Jake's neat handwriting. He planned this entire meeting, my entire future, without asking what I actually wanted. Spring semester, I heard myself say. I'd like to start in January. Jake's smile could have lit up the room. Really? Sarah, that's fantastic. I know how much this means to you. But as I signed my name to document after document, authorizing the expenditure of Tommy's fundraiser money on my education and our romantic getaway, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Jake wasn't just planning our fresh start. He was creating evidence that I'd willingly participated in it. Every signature, every nod of agreement, every yes to his plans was being documented by a financial professional who would remember that the grieving mother had been an eager participant in spending her son's charity money on herself. When the police eventually investigated the missing funds, and they would, once I made sure of it, Jake would have witnesses. Documentation. Proof that Sarah had been just as eager as he was to move on and spend Tommy's money on their new life. I was signing my name to my own destruction. And I was going to let him think he'd won right up until the moment I destroyed him. 9 days until the reunion. 9 days to decide whether exposing Jake's betrayal was worth destroying the last shred of my old life. 9 days to choose between justice and the complete annihilation of everything I had left. The drive home from the financial planner was silent except for Jake's humming, some cheerful tune I didn't recognize. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel at red lights, practically bouncing in his seat. I can't believe you're actually doing this, Sarah. Graduate school, the Italy trip, it's like watching you come back to life. I stared out the passenger window at the November landscape, bare trees reaching toward a gray sky like skeletal fingers. It feels surreal. Good surreal or bad surreal? I'm still processing everything. The forms in my purse felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. My signature on documents that would fund our new Tommy-free existence with money donated by people who'd read his story and wept for a little boy they'd never met. Jake reached over and squeezed my knee. I know it's a lot. But Sarah, this is what healing looks like. This is what moving forward means. Moving forward. The family's favorite phrase, like grief was a traffic jam you could simply drive around if you took the right route. Jake, can I ask you something? Of course. When you first started thinking about the Italy trip, really seriously planning it, what made you decide it was time? His fingers tightened on the steering wheel almost imperceptibly. I guess, when I realized that staying frozen in place wasn't helping either of us. Tommy wouldn't want us to stop living. Tommy wouldn't want us to stop living. Another family favorite, as if my 8-year-old son had left behind detailed instructions for how quickly we should get over his death. But specifically, what was the moment? Was it something I said, or did, or... Sarah, why does it matter? Because I need to know exactly when you decided I was ready to be the wife you always wanted instead of the mother I actually am, I thought. But out loud, I said, I'm just curious about your perspective on my healing process. We pulled into our driveway, past the mailbox that still read the Morrison family in cheerful blue letters Tommy had helped paint 2 summers ago. If I'm being honest, Jake said, turning off the engine, it was after your conversation with Lisa. When you called me and said you were starting to see things differently. That's when I knew you were finally ready to accept help. Accept help. Not heal or move forward, but accept help. As if grief was a character defect that required correction. What kind of help? Professional guidance, family support, perspective on Tommy's situation. He turned to face me fully. Sarah, for 2 years you've been locked in this bubble where Tommy's death was purely tragic, purely senseless. But Lisa helped you see that maybe, just maybe, there were aspects of his passing that spared all of us from harder futures. There it was. The truth he'd been dancing around for months, delivered in the sanctuary of our driveway with the confidence of a man who thought his wife had finally seen the light. Harder futures like what? Like watching him deteriorate further. Like choosing between his care and our marriage. Like... He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Like having to make impossible decisions about his long-term placement when his behaviors became unmanageable. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. You think we would have institutionalized Tommy? I think we would have faced choices that no parent should have to make. And maybe this way, he's remembered as the sweet little boy he was instead of. Jake's voice trailed off. Instead of what? Instead of the person his disabilities would have turned him into. The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Mrs. Patterson's wind chimes played their discordant song. 8 days until the reunion, I said quietly. 8 days until we celebrate our family coming back together. Jake's smile was radiant, victorious. 8 days until everything goes back to normal. Normal. The word that had haunted me for 2 years, the impossible standard Tommy could never have met. But I was about to show them all exactly what normal really looked like. That evening, I sat in my car outside the Marriott downtown, staring at the glowing windows of the hotel bar where Jake's family held their monthly cousins' night out. I'd never been invited. Tommy's bedtime routine had always conflicted with their 8 p.m. start time, and after he died, they'd simply stopped mentioning it. But tonight, armed with my phone and a story about wanting to reconnect with family, I was going to document exactly what they really thought about Tommy when they assumed I couldn't hear. The recording app was already running when I walked into the dimly lit bar. I spotted them immediately, Jake's cousins Beth and Mike, his uncle Pete, and Lisa, holding court at a corner table with an almost empty bottle of wine between them. Sarah. Beth's voice was artificially bright, the kind of enthusiasm reserved for recovering addicts and recently divorced friends. What a surprise. Come join us. I approached their table with what I hoped was a grateful, slightly fragile smile. I was having dinner alone and saw you all through the window. I hope you don't mind. Of course not. Lisa jumped up to hug me, her breath sharp with alcohol. We were just talking about how wonderful it is that you're coming to the reunion. Sit, sit. They made room for me at their table, and I ordered a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking. The conversation resumed its flow around me, work gossip, vacation plans, Beth's teenagers' college applications. Normal family chatter that I'd been excluded from for years, first by Tommy's needs and then by my difficult grief. After 20 minutes, Lisa steered the conversation exactly where I'd hoped it would go. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. About Tommy's future, and the medical bills, and everything. She leaned forward conspiratorially. I think you're being really brave to face those realities. It's been hard, I said, letting my voice catch slightly. But necessary. Absolutely necessary, Uncle Pete chimed in. I mean, my buddy from work has a nephew with autism, kid's 22 now and still having meltdowns in grocery stores. Can you imagine? Beth nodded vigorously. My friend's autistic son is 16 and weighs 180. Last week he threw their coffee table through a window because they ran out of his favorite cereal. They had to call the police. That's exactly what we were worried about with Tommy, Lisa said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used when explaining real estate contracts. The trajectory was already concerning. Remember his episode at Christmas? He was only 8 and already getting physical. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to nod. Tommy's Christmas episode had been a 5-minute meltdown when his cousin Kevin deliberately knocked down his carefully arranged present display. He'd pushed Kevin away from his gifts and sobbed until I could calm him down. Hardly violent, but apparently it had been analyzed and catalogued as evidence of future aggression. The financial aspect alone, Mike added, swirling his bourbon. Those specialized programs, behavioral therapists, modified living arrangements when he got older. We're talking hundreds of thousands over a lifetime. More than that, Lisa said. I looked it up after Tommy's diagnosis. Lifetime care for a severely autistic individual averages $2.3 million. And that's assuming no major medical complications. $2.3 million. She'd researched it. Actually sat down and calculated the cost of my son's life like he was a business expense. Plus the impact on marriages, Beth said, glancing at me sympathetically. I read that 80% of autism parents divorce. The stress just destroys relationships. You and Jake were already showing signs, Uncle Pete said, apparently forgetting I was sitting right there. Jake looked exhausted every time we saw him. And Sarah, honey, you were completely consumed by Tommy's needs. When's the last time you two went on a date before he got sick? I pretended to think about it while my phone captured every word. I honestly can't remember. See? That's not sustainable long-term, Lisa said. Children are supposed to enhance a marriage, not consume it entirely. The conversation continued for another 47 minutes. They discussed Tommy's future group home placement, inevitable, the likelihood of him ever holding employment, virtually zero, and the probability that he would have required lifelong supervision, 100%. They talked about my transformation from vibrant young woman to exhausted caregiver and Jake's sacrifice of career advancement for constant crisis management. They analyzed Tommy's behaviors, his prognosis, his impact on family gatherings where everyone had to walk on eggshells around his sensitivities. By the time I excused myself at 10:30, claiming exhaustion, I had over an hour of additional recordings. The cousins hugged me goodbye with tears in their eyes, praising my courage and strength for finally accepting the truth about Tommy's situation. I sat in my car in the hotel parking lot, hands shaking as I played back the most damning quotes. Lisa calculating my son's monetary value. Uncle Pete describing Tommy's Christmas meltdown as evidence of future violence. Beth explaining why my marriage was doomed to fail. 7 days until the reunion. 7 days until I played every recording for the extended family who thought they were protecting a grieving aunt who'd misspoken. 7 days until they learned that Lisa hadn't made a drunken mistake at Tommy's funeral reception. She'd simply said out loud what they'd all been thinking for years. The morning of November 15th, exactly 1 week before the reunion, I woke up to find Jake already gone. A note on the kitchen counter explained he'd left early for a surprise appointment and would be back by noon with something special. I was still staring at his neat handwriting when my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Morrison? This is Detective Chen with the Fraud Investigation Unit. We've received a complaint regarding potential misuse of charitable funds associated with your son's medical fundraiser. My blood turned to ice. I'm sorry, what? Someone contacted our office yesterday claiming that money donated for Tommy Morrison's medical expenses has been used for personal expenditures. We're required to investigate all such allegations. Would you be available to come in for questioning this afternoon? The phone slipped in my suddenly sweaty palm. Who made this complaint? I can't disclose that information at this time. But Mrs. Morrison, I want to assure you that these investigations are routine. If the funds were used appropriately, you have nothing to worry about. Can we schedule something for today? I managed to stammer out an agreement for 3 p.m., then hung up with shaking hands. Someone had reported us. Someone knew about the Italy fund, the graduate school payments, Jake's careful redistribution of Tommy's charity money. But who? The answer came 20 minutes later in the form of Jake's brother Mark standing on my doorstep with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, disgusted, almost pitying. Sarah. We need to talk. I led him into the living room, my mind racing. Mark had always been the quiet brother, the responsible one who stayed out of family drama. His presence here, now, felt ominous. I know about the recordings, he said without preamble. My heart stopped. What recordings? Lisa called me last night, hysterical. Said you'd been gathering evidence against the family. Apparently Beth recognized the signs, you asking leading questions, the sudden reconciliation, showing up places you'd never been before. Mark sat heavily on our couch, the same couch where Tommy used to build pillow forts. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? I forced myself to look confused rather than terrified. Mark, I have no idea what you're talking about. Beth remembered that your phone was face down on the table all evening at the bar. Screen side down but positioned perfectly to pick up conversation. And Lisa said during your coffee date, you kept steering the discussion back to Tommy's burden on the family, almost like you were trying to get her to say specific things. My mouth felt desert dry. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because when I started thinking about it, a lot of things made sense. Your sudden call to Lisa after 2 years of silence. The convenient timing of your breakthrough just before the reunion. Your willingness to meet with a financial planner and spend Tommy's fund money after months of treating his room like a shrine. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping. But here's what really convinced me, Sarah. I know my brother. I know how guilty he's been feeling about using that GoFundMe money for your future instead of just medical bills. He's been beating himself up for months, convinced he was dishonoring Tommy's memory. Mark. So I decided to help him. I called the fraud investigation unit myself this morning and reported the misuse of charitable funds. The world tilted sideways. You what? I reported Jake. My own brother. Mark's voice was steady, matter of fact. Because I realized that whatever sick game you're playing, whatever evidence you think you're collecting for the reunion, you were going to destroy him along with everyone else. I stared at him, unable to speak. Jake doesn't know yet. He's actually at the travel agency right now, finalizing your Italy surprise. He thinks he's planning your romantic healing journey while you're at home plotting his destruction. Mark stood up, straightening his jacket. The investigation will show that Jake used donated funds inappropriately, but it will also show that you signed every single document authorizing those expenditures. You're both going down, Sarah. 6 days until the reunion, Mark continued, heading toward the door. But neither of you will be attending. You'll both be too busy dealing with fraud charges. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the silence of our too empty house, surrounded by the wreckage of my perfect plan. I had wanted to destroy them all. Instead, I had destroyed myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Surprise appointment went perfectly. Can't wait to show you what I planned. Home by noon with champagne to celebrate our new beginning. Love you. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Jake was buying champagne to celebrate our fresh start while Detective Chen prepared fraud investigation paperwork. Mark thought he'd protected his brother by destroying us both, not realizing Jake was about to walk into a trap that would obliterate everything. The recordings on my phone felt like poison now. 2 hours and 17 minutes of audio that would prove my family considered Tommy a burden, but also prove I deliberately manipulated them into saying it. Evidence that would validate my rage but also demonstrate premeditation, calculation, the systematic destruction of relationships while pretending to reconcile. Detective Chen would hear those recordings during the investigation. He'd see the pattern: grieving mother pretends to forgive, secretly documents conversations, plans dramatic revelation at family reunion while simultaneously authorizing expenditure of charity funds she knew were being misused. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the perpetrator. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Jake's travel agent, confirming our romantic Tuscan escape package for March 15th through March 29th, 14 days in Italy, visiting the vineyards and art galleries we dreamed about before Tommy's diagnosis consumed our lives. The trip Jake had booked with money donated by strangers who'd read about our 8-year-old's battle with leukemia. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence of my family's callousness while building my own case for fraud prosecution. Another email, this one from the Graduate School Admissions Office. Dear Sarah Morrison, thank you for your application to our Master's in Art Therapy program. We've received your deposit and look forward to welcoming you to our January cohort. My deposit. Paid with Tommy's GoFundMe money while I plotted to expose everyone who'd suggested his death might be a blessing in disguise. I walked to Tommy's room and sat on his unchanged bed, surrounded by action figures frozen in eternal battle. The dinosaur books he'd memorized. The weighted blanket that had helped calm his overwhelmed nervous system. The perfect rows of Hot Wheels cars arranged by color, exactly as he'd left them the morning we drove to the hospital for what we thought would be routine blood work. 22 months, 15 days since that morning. 22 months of baking his favorite cookies, preserving his space, refusing to move forward while my husband planned our post-Tommy future and my in-laws calculated the lifetime cost of my son's care. But somewhere in my righteous fury, I'd become exactly what they'd always said I was: unstable, vindictive, unable to process grief in healthy ways. The house phone rang. Detective Chen's office, probably calling to confirm our 3 p.m. appointment or ask preliminary questions about the GoFundMe account. I let it go to voicemail. Another call immediately after. Lisa's number this time. Then Margaret. Then Emma. The family network was activating. Mark had made his calls, and now they were circling the wagons, trying to figure out how much damage I could still inflict before the fraud investigation shut me down completely. But they didn't know about the recordings yet. Not the content, not the scope, not the devastating clarity of their voices explaining why Tommy's death had been a gift to everyone who'd had to accommodate his existence. 6 days until the reunion. 6 days until I could still play those audio files for the extended family, even if it meant destroying myself in the process. Jake's key turned in the front door. Sarah. Where are you? I had the most incredible surprise. His footsteps bounded up the stairs, full of excitement and love and anticipation for the life we were finally going to build together. The life Tommy's death had made possible. Jake burst into Tommy's room with a bottle of champagne and travel brochures scattered across his arms, his face glowing with excitement that died the moment he saw my expression. Sarah? What's wrong? You look. Detective Chen called, I said quietly. Fraud investigation unit. Someone reported us for misusing Tommy's GoFundMe money. The brochure slipped from his hands, colorful images of Italian vineyards scattering across Tommy's dinosaur-themed carpet. What? That's impossible. Who would? Mark. Your brother reported you this morning to protect you from me. I stood up slowly, my phone heavy in my pocket with all those damning recordings. He knows about the recordings, Jake. They all know. Jake's face went white. Recordings? What recordings? I pulled out my phone and hit play. Lisa's voice filled Tommy's bedroom, crystal clear. I mean, you have to admit the medical bills alone would have bankrupted you eventually. And with his condition, maybe God knew what he was doing. Jake sank onto Tommy's desk chair like his legs had given out. Sarah, how long have you been? 2 hours and 17 minutes total. Lisa, your mother, your cousins at the bar last week. All of them explaining why our son's death was actually a blessing. My voice was steady, surgical. Want to hear your part? Where you admit you wondered what life would be like with an easier child. You manipulated me. You manipulated all of us. His voice was barely a whisper. The same way you manipulated me into signing those financial planning documents while Tommy's charity money paid for our romantic fresh start. I sat back down on Tommy's bed, surrounded by the toys of a boy everyone thought was better off dead. We're both going to jail, Jake. But everyone's still coming to the reunion on Saturday. He stared at me like I was a stranger. You're actually going to do it? Play those recordings in front of the whole family. Tommy was 8 years old. He arranged his cars by color and knew every dinosaur species that ever existed. He hugged me so hard after his first chemo session and said, "Mommy, I think I was brave today." Tears started flowing, the first I'd cried since beginning this war. And every single person in your family has spent 2 years explaining why the world is better without him in it. Jake's shoulders shook. We loved him, Sarah. We all loved him. No. You loved the idea of being the kind of people who could love a child like Tommy. But when it got hard, really hard, you started calculating the cost. I stood up, phone still recording even now. Detective Chen wants to see us at 3 p.m. The reunion's at 6 p.m. Saturday. I'm going to both. Sarah, please. This will destroy everyone. Our marriage, my family, your family. Good. The word came out clean and sharp as winter air. Maybe that's what should happen to people who think dead children are preferable to difficult ones. I walked past him, past the scattered Italy brochures, past 2 years of careful plans for our Tommy-free future. At Tommy's doorway, I turned back one last time. I'll see you at the reunion, Jake. Assuming we're not in jail by then. Saturday evening, I walked into the Riverside Community Center with my phone connected to the venue's sound system. 47 family members gathered for our annual reunion, all of them expecting a celebration of my healing and Lisa's vindication. Instead, I played every recording. 2 hours and 17 minutes of their voices, explaining why my beautiful boy was better off dead. Some relationships are worth destroying to protect the memory of an 8-year-old who counted ceiling tiles and gave the fiercest hugs in the world.